It's been 4 months since the United States began threatening to invade Venezuela, but today things changed slightly. President Trump ordered the seizure of all oil tankers bound for Venezuela, effectively creating a naval blockade. Today, let's take a closer look at this issue. Let's get right into it. President Trump labeled the Maduro regime a foreign terrorist organization and ordered a total blockade of sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuela. President Trump announced on Truth Social that Venezuela is now surrounded by the largest fleet in South American history. President Trump justified the blockade by citing the Maduro regime's illegal activities and seizure of American assets. President Trump said the illegal Maduro regime uses stolen oil to support its rule and fund crimes like drug and human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. He added that because of asset theft and drug smuggling, the Venezuelan regime is now labeled a foreign terrorist organization. In particular, President Trump demanded that Venezuela immediately return the oil, land, and other assets stolen from the United States. He also issued an ultimatum, stating that if these are not returned, the blockade will continue. The United States Department of War hasn't released blockade operation details yet, but military experts say United States military forces already in the Caribbean are enough to blockade the Venezuelan coast. It is expected that they will carry out a maritime blockade of Venezuela, which is a very serious matter for Venezuela. The Maduro regime's main source of funds is essentially oil exports, and by completely blocking these oil exports, they intend to induce the collapse of the regime. This is the United States' strongest pressure strategy short of war. Oil now makes up 72.4% of Venezuela's exports and 58% of its government budget. That's only from stopping oil. The United States seized a tanker off Venezuela's coast, allegedly bound for Asia. On December 10th, the FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, and the United States Coast Guard, with government support, executed a seizure warrant. They rappelled from a helicopter onto the ship, aimed their guns, entered the bridge, and seized the vessel. President Trump also stated that the crude oil loaded on the ship would become ours. The United States explained that the reason for the seizure was that the seized oil tanker had previously been involved in smuggling Iranian crude oil. Also, the seized vessel was flying the flag of a different Central or South American country, not its actual country of registration. Venezuela strongly protested, calling it blatant robbery and piracy. However, President Trump openly stated in response to questions about ousting President Maduro that Maduro's days are numbered. The United States was once the main importer of Venezuelan crude oil. Their proximity and the compatibility of Venezuelan oil with American refineries kept trade between them stable for years. In 2017, President Trump banned Venezuelan crude oil imports and froze the state oil companies and government's assets, rapidly changing the situation. As a result, Venezuela suddenly lost its main stable market and, unable to find new buyers, saw a sharp drop in oil production. To cope, the Maduro regime turned to China. Venezuela sold to Chinese refineries at prices 80% lower, giving China a chance to secure cheap, reliable energy in exchange for sanction risks. Oil payments were often made through loan repayments or barter, leaving Venezuela barely able to keep its economy afloat. Recently, the United States began seizing oil tankers bound for China, blocking even this last outlet. If exports to China are blocked, Venezuela will lose its route to ship crude oil. This will cause a steep drop in foreign currency earnings, fiscal collapse, and public service paralysis. Given the fiscal structure of the Maduro regime, a halt in oil exports would simultaneously undermine the military and security forces, organizational and subsidy systems, and the political support base needed to maintain the regime. Ultimately, the current trend of the United States targeting oil tankers bound for China is being interpreted not just as a measure to pressure the Venezuelan economy, but as an action aimed directly at the survival of the Maduro regime itself. If this pressure continues, there is growing analysis that Venezuela will likely be pushed into a situation with almost no options left. On December 15, Trinidad and Tobago, a Caribbean nation near Venezuela, allowed United States military planes to use its airports. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that the United States military will soon have access to our airports for resupplying and regular personnel rotations. There have been recent reports of the United States installing radar systems at Trinidad and Tobago airports. Trinidad and Tobago, an island nation 11 kilometers northeast of Venezuela, seems to be indirectly backing the United States as pressure on Venezuela Venezuela, especially as Venezuela has strongly protested. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, stepped forward to explain. She explained that the radar was installed to combat local crime, but this explanation is being considered unconvincing. In Washington, many are increasingly concerned that President Trump's maritime blockade of Venezuela may escalate from diplomatic or political pressure to military conflict. In particular, there is growing concern even within Washington that this measure is not just a simple strengthening of sanctions, but is gradually hinting at the deployment of aircraft carrier strike groups, the seizure of oil tankers, the establishment of forward bases, and even the possibility of ground attacks. There is also skepticism, as rumors of a Venezuelan invasion have circulated for over 4 months. Since taking office, President Trump has often said Nicolas Maduro's days are numbered, but has not sent ground troops or launched a direct invasion for regime change. Some diplomatic and security experts see this latest pressure as psychological and economic warfare to create internal divisions within the regime, not as a step toward all-out war. Given existing challenges in the Middle East, Ukraine, and competition with China, some analysts say invading Venezuela would bring excessively high political and military costs. Nevertheless, what clearly distinguishes this situation from the past is that the United States has begun to physically block Venezuela's key source of funding, its oil exports, demonstrating action rather than just words. In Washington, the prevailing view is that the issue is not whether to invade or not, but rather that this conflict has entered a different phase. The tension is higher than ever, with the understanding that even a small miscalculation or accidental clash could quickly escalate into a military confrontation. Maduro's regime now has very limited response options. Due to the vast military gap, if the Venezuelan Navy or Air Force directly confronts the United States, it would instantly give the United States clear justification for military action. The United States military in the Caribbean far outweighs Venezuela's forces, so even a minor clash could be disastrous for Maduro's regime. As a result, Venezuela must consider alternatives to direct military conflict. The first issue is the use of asymmetric means in the Americas. Rather than taking direct action, Venezuela is being discussed as possibly using friendly non-state actors or third-party forces to amplify insecurity, political tension, and social unrest within countries where the United States has strong influence. This differs from traditional warfare, but still continually burdens the opponent. Venezuela will likely boost its international public relations efforts by diplomatically labeling the United States blockade as illegal. By portraying United States actions as breaches of international norms to the United Nations and non-aligned nations, they may seek political isolation rather than a military response. Ultimately, the Maduro regime will likely respond with indirect pressure rather than direct confrontation with United States warships. There are predictions this situation may not cause open war, but instead lead to short-term tension and anxiety. We must also consider that the United States will bear a significant burden in this process. If the maritime blockade drags on, the ongoing cost of deploying the United States Navy and Coast Guard will keep rising. Maintaining the carrier strike group and initial assets continuously burdens strategic operations elsewhere. If armed resistance or accidental clashes such as 5-man shootings occurred during the seizure of oil tankers, the United States will find itself in a situation where it has to manage not only Venezuela, but also the flag states of the vessels, and even relations with nearby allied countries at the same time. Especially since the Caribbean and Central and South America have historically reacted sensitively to United States military intervention, it is hard to rule out the possibility that anti-American sentiment could quickly spread throughout South America the longer the blockade continues. This could create political problems even in pro-American countries and force the United States to balance military pressure with avoiding diplomatic rifts. The current crisis in Venezuela is ongoing. What do you all think about the current situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.